Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Manjeet Singh from Punjabi University Patiala. Today we are going to discuss about a module on the topic World Trade Organization, that is WTO, under the paper Business Environment. Now after completing this module, you should be in a position to understand the meaning and history of World Trade Organization. You should also be in a position to understand the functions and the objectives of World Trade Organization. You will also be in a position to understand the various principles of WTO and the various agreements of WTO. The General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, known as GATT, is one third of the Bretton Woods system that was created after the Second World War to guarantee a stable trade and economic environment. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank are the other two bodies of the Bretton Woods system which were created. While often referred as international organization, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff had a de facto role in the international organization before the creation of World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization was established on January 1st, 1995 by the final act of Uruguay round of negotiations. The World Trade Organization is one of the international organizations dealing with the rules of trade between different nations. World Trade Organization agreements negotiate and signed by the world's trading nations and ratified in their parliaments. The main goal of WTO is to help the producers of goods and services, the exporters and importers who conduct their businesses. Born in 1995 but not so young, the WTO, that is World Trade Organization, began life on January 1995, but its trading system is more than a half century older. Since 1948, GATT, that is General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, has provided the rules for the system. The last and largest GATT round was the Uruguay round, which lasted from 1986 to 1994 and led to WTO's creation. Whereas GATT had mainly dealt with trade in goods and now covers the trade in services and in traded inventions, creations and designs. Objectives of World Trade Organization. The first is to promote trade flows by encouraging nations to adopt predictable trade and non-discriminatory policies. Secondly, to establish procedures for settlement of trade dispute amongst members. Thirdly, taking positive steps to ensure that secure a better share of growth in world trade. Fourthly, raising standard of living and income, expanding production and full employment, and optimum utilization of the world's resources. Fifthly, to introduce sustainable development, a concept which envisages the environment and development to go side by side. Sixthly, elimination of all forms of protectionism. Seventh, the maximum possible level of transparency. 8. Progressive liberalization of international trade in services. And lastly, progressive liberalization and elimination of tariffs and non-tariff barriers to trade in goods. Scope of WTO. GATT, that is General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, was concerned with promotion of trade in goods. Trade in services was not given a lot of emphasis. While in WTO, trade in services has been emphasized. It consists of the following areas: trade in goods, trade related investment measures, popularly known as TRIMS, trade-related intellectual property rights, popularly known as TRIPS, General Agreement on Trade in Services, that is GATS. Functions of WTO. It oversees the administration, implementation, and operation of covered agreements. Secondly, it provides an opportunity for negotiations and for settlement of disputes. Thirdly, WTO provides the framework for the implementation, administration, and operation of multilateral trade agreements. Fourthly, the WTO shall provide the forum for negotiations among its members concerning their multilateral trade relations in matters dealt under the agreement. The WTO shall administer the understanding on rules, regulations, and procedures governing the settlement of disputes. Sixth is the WTO shall administer the trade policy review mechanism. Seventh is to act as a forum for the negotiation of further trade liberalization. Another function is to cooperate with IMF, that is International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. And lastly, to resolve the trade related disputes. Principles of trading system. The World Trade Organization agreements are long lasting and complex because they are legal texts covering a broad range of activities. They deal with banking, telecommunication, government purchases, agriculture, textiles and clothing, industrial standards, and product safety, food sanitation, regulations, intellectual property, and much more. But a number of simple, basic principles run throughout all these documents. These principles are the base of the multilateral trading system. Most favored nation. Under the WTO agreements, countries normally cannot differentiate between their trading partners, but they can grant someone a special favor, such as a lower custom duty rate for one of their products. This principle is known as most favored nation treatment. Hence, it is very important that it is the first article of General Agreement on Trade and Tariff which governs the trade in goods. It is also a priority in General Agreement on Trade in Services and Agreement on trade related aspects of intellectual property rights, although in each agreement the principle is handled differently. Together, those three agreements cover all three main areas of trade handled by WTO. National treatment, treating foreigners and locals equally. Under WTO agreements, imported and domestically produced goods should be treated equally, at least after the overseas goods have entered the market. The same should apply to foreign and domestic services, copyrights and patents, foreign and local trademarks, etc. This principle of national treatment is also found in all the three main WTO agreements, that is GATT, GATS and TRIPS. Although once again the principle is handled slightly differently in each of the case. National treatment only applies one time a product, service or item of intellectual property has entered the market. Therefore, charging custom duty on an import is not a violation of national treatment even if domestically produced products are not charged an equivalent tax. Free trade gradually through negotiations. Eliminating trade barriers is one of the most obvious means of encouraging trade. The barriers concerned include custom duties and measures such as import bans that restrict quantities selectively. From time to time, various other issues such as red tape and exchange rate policies have also been discussed. Since GATT's creation in 1947-48, there have been 8 rounds of trade negotiations. A ninth round under the Doha Development Agenda is now underway. At first, these focused on lowering tariffs, custom duties on imported goods. But by the 1980s, the negotiation had extended to cover non tariff barriers on goods and to the new areas such as services and intellectual property. Predictability through binding and transparency. Sometimes promising not to elevate a trade barrier can be as important as lowering one because the promise gives businesses a clearer view of their future opportunities. With stability, investment is encouraged, jobs are formed, and customers can fully enjoy the benefits of competition, choice, and lower prices. This trading system is an attempt by the governments to make the business environment stable and predictable. In WTO, when nations agree to open their market for goods and services, they bind their commitments. For goods, these bindings amount to ceilings on customs tariff rates. Sometimes, nation tax imports at rates which are lower than the bound rates. Promoting fair competition. The WTO is described as a free trade institution, but that is not entirely correct. The system does allow tariff and, in limited situation, other forms of protection. More accurately, it is a system of rules devoted to open, fair, and undistorted competition. The rules on non discrimination, like MFN and national treatment, are designed to secure fair conditions of trade. The issues are complex, and the rules endeavor to establish what is fair or unfair and how the government can respond, in particular by charging additional import duties calculated to compensate for the damage caused by unfair trade. Many of the other WTO agreements aim to carry fair competition in agriculture, intellectual property, services, and so on, encouraging development and economic reforms. This system contributes to development. On the other hand, developing countries need flexibility in the time they take to execute the system's agreements, and the agreements themselves succeed to the earlier provisions of GATT that allow for special assistance and trade concession for developing countries. During the 7.5 years of Uruguay Round, over 60 of the countries implemented trade liberalization programs freely. At the same time, developing countries and transition economies were much more active and influential in the Uruguay Round negotiation than in any preceding round. And they are even more so in the current Doha Development Agenda. World Trade Organization, some agreements. General Agreement on Trade and Tariff 1994. The General Agreement consists of number 1, provisions of the GATT 1947, including those amended by the terms of legal instruments that have taken effect before the overview of WTO. Secondly, legal instruments such as protocols and certifications related to tariff concessions, protocols of accession, etc., that have taken effect under GATT 1947 before the entry into force of WTO. Agreement on Agriculture. Agreement on agriculture includes specific and binding commitments made by WTO. Member governments in the three areas of domestic support, export subsidization, and market access for strengthening GATT principles and improving agriculture trade. Trade in textiles and clothing. The main objective of this agreement is to secure the clothing and textile sector. In this sector, multi-fiber agreement was prevalent from last few years. Multi-fiber agreement was preventing underdeveloped countries to export textiles in developed nations. Multi-fiber agreement restrictions in force on 31st December 1994 would be carried over to the final act and maintained until such time as the restrictions are split or product integrated into WTO. TRIPS, that is Trade Related Intellectual Property Rights. This agreement is related to intellectual property rights. These rights can be with regards to trademarks, copyrights, patents, etc. TRIPS recognizes that extensively varying standards in the protection and enforcement of intellectual property rights and the lack of multilateral disciplines dealing with international trade in counterfeit goods have been a rising source of tension in international economic relations. Under TRIPS, life of patents has been fixed as follows: general patent for 20 years, copyrights for 50 years, trademark for 7 years, industrial designs for 10 years, medicines for 10 years. The intellectual property rights which are patented can be used by the manufacturers or the consumers by making disbursement of royalty to the patent holder. TRIMS, that is Trade Related Investment Measures. Multinational organization is aware of many restrictions on their investments in overseas countries. Trade related investment measures are investment related measures proposed by World Trade Organization to ensure free flow of investment all over the world. Trade related investment measure agreement will help the underdeveloped nations by providing necessary capital in the form of foreign investment. This agreement will also help to solve the balance of payment problem. The agreement doesn't set broad rules and regulations for investors in the member country. It simply prohibits law, rule, and regulations that condition a country's right to import foreign goods on the volume of goods exported. The main features of TRIM are, firstly, to offer free treatment and all other facilities to overseas investors as all available to their domestic investors. Secondly, to eliminate restrictions on repatriation of interest, dividend, and royalty of multinational companies. Thirdly, to allow 100% foreign equity participation in certain areas. Fourthly, to remove all restrictions on every area of foreign investment. In simple words, the TRIMS open the opportunity to foreign investors to invest anywhere in the world in any economic activity. GATS, that is General Agreement on Trade in Services. GATS is the first set of multilateral agreement covering international trade in services. It provides free flow of services among the member countries. The agreement covers trade in all types of services like insurance, tourism, hotel, banking, shipping, telecommunication, IT enabled services, media services, etc. This agreement operates at four modes. Mode 1 is cross border trade, Mode 2 consumption abroad, Mode 3 commercial presence, Mode 4 temporary movement of natural persons. Dispute settlement. For settlement of disputes relating to trade, the World Trade Organization has set up dispute settlement body. Director General of WTO will act as mediator for the settlement of dispute. The complainant nation can also ask dispute settlement body to set up a panel for dispute settlement. The panel will be constituted by dispute settlement body whose decision will be unconditionally acceptable to both parties. This panel will have to give its report within 60 to 90 days. Then DSB will take final decision within 30 days. Agreement on export subsidies. World Trade Organization agreements prohibit export subsidies to promote free and fair competition in the international trade. Anti-dumping measures. GATT permits members to apply anti-dumping measures. More detailed rules governing the application of such measures, which can take the form of either duties or undertakings on pricing by exporters, were negotiated during the Tokyo round, and same was revised in the Uruguay round. Reviewing trade policies of member countries. The TPRM provides for trade policy review body to frequently examine the economic and trade policies of member nations. It examines the trade policies in every 2 years for four major traders, every 4 years for the next 16 leading traders, and every 6 years for remaining traders, although longer intervals may be prescribed for least developed nations. It has helped member countries to access their economic and trade policies. Organizational structure. The General Council has the following subsidiary bodies which oversees committees in different areas. Council for Trade in Goods. There are 11 committees under the jurisdiction of Goods Council, each one with a specific job. All members of WTO join the committees. The body has its own chairman and 10 members. The body has several groups relating to textiles and clothing. Council for Trade Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights. Information on intellectual property in WTO, that is World Trade Organization, news, and official records of the performance of TRIPS Council and details of the WTO's work with other international organizations in the field is the jurisdiction of this council. Council for Trade in Services. The Council for Trade in Services operates under the control of General Council and is responsible for overseeing the functioning of General Agreement on Trade in Services. It is open to all World Trade Organization members and can create subsidiary bodies as required. Trade Negotiations Committee. The Trade Negotiation Committee is the committee that deals with the current trade talks round. As of June 2012, this committee was tasked with Doha Development Round. The Service Council has three subsidiary bodies, that is domestic regulation, financial services, GATS rules, and specific commitments. The Council has several different committees and working parties, working groups. There are committees on the following: trade and environment, trade and development, regional trade agreements, balance of payment restriction, finance and administration and budget, etc. There are working groups on the following: trade, trade and technology, transfer, debt and finance. Now let's talk about the role of or the importance of ministerial conference. The highest decision-making body of the World Trade Organization is the Ministerial Conference, which generally meets once in every 2 years. It brings together all members of the WTO. In 1996, the inaugural Ministerial Conference was held in Singapore. Disagreements between mostly the developed and developing economies emerged during this conference over four issues, which were initiated in this conference, which led them being collectively referred to as Singapore issues. In 1998, the second ministerial conference was held in Geneva in Switzerland. In 1999, the third conference was held in Seattle. Washington ended in a failure, with a massive demonstrations and the police and National Guard crowd control efforts drawing worldwide attention. In 2001, the fourth ministerial conference was held in Doha. The Doha Development Round was launched at the conference, and the conference also approved the joining of China, which became the 143rd member of this WTO. In 2003, the fifth ministerial conference was held in Mexico, aiming at forging agreement on the Doha Round. An association of 22 southern states, the G20 developing nations, resisted the demands from the North for agreements on so-called Singapore issues and called for an end to the agriculture subsidies within European Union and USA. In 2005, the sixth WTO Ministerial Conference was held in from 13th to 18th of December in Hong Kong. It was considered very important because the four-year-old Doha Development Round negotiations were to move forward adequately to conclude the round in 2006. In this meeting, by the end of 2013, the nations agreed to phase out all their agriculture export subsidies and terminate many cotton export subsidies. On 26th of May 2009, the WTO General Council agreed to hold 7th WTO Ministerial Conference session in Geneva from 30th of November to 3rd of December in 2009. Arguments in favor of WTO: increase in the foreign trade, increase in agriculture exports, increase in inflow of foreign investment, improvement in services, benefits for clothing and textile industry, inflow of better technology and better quality product, benefits of multilateral trade system, promotion to research because of patents, benefits of using quality seeds and new variety of plants, restrict dumping. Arguments against WTO: loss to domestic industries, increase litigation cost, loss to regional grouping, disadvantages to service sector, increase in unemployment. Now students, let us summarize what we have learned in this module. World Trade Organization is an international trade organization having a set of rule regulation and principles mutually designed and agreed upon to promote the international trade in general and reduction of tariffs, barriers, and removal of import restrictions in particular. In short, WTO is a new globally recognized trade organization with a new succeeding name called GATT on renewed agreement and having new vision and powerful enforcement power to promote the international trade. WTO agreement will help India in promoting its foreign trade of goods as well as of services. Inflow of foreign technology, foreign investment, improved seeds will benefit our economy in escalating the rate of economic development. Moreover, all agreements cannot be in favor of one country, as these are formulated in the view of interest of all member nations. So India should try to take best advantages from these agreements. Thank you.